this, thank you. So we've been going through a little bit of transition, essentially. We had another administrator who made this a very big kind of performance and a show, I guess you could say, and like just a lot going on in every single meeting. So this is an attempt, sort of this reset is an attempt to streamline these meetings and get through this Superfund cleanup, essentially. And we want to be laser focused on that. We don't want to be distracted from that focus and getting the soil cleaned for these residences, and then also just in the areas where there could be potential development, because as we all know, if you start to dig into polluted soil, then it starts being airborne particulates and all kinds of other things. So that's where we're at right now. We're really kind of in this space where we recognize that maybe there was a lot of additional stuff in these meetings, and now we want to really just streamline that process. So, okay.
Oh, and Rachel, maybe before we go further, we can let Valentina do the language justice statement and turn on interpretation, so everyone can, in case there's anyone listening in Spanish, they can hear and understand what you're saying. Is that all right? Okay.
Yeah, please. I'll be quiet until it's ready.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Joel. So hi, everyone. My name is Valentina, and I'm here on behalf of Community Language Co-op, here to provide and guarantee your commitment to language justice. Language justice is a type of simultaneous interpretation that seeks to create spaces in which no one language is dominant, spaces in which everyone can participate with the language of their heart. So to achieve this objective, we'll be using Zoom's interpretation feature. What you will see in a couple of minutes is that a new button that looks like a globe will appear at the bottom of your screen in that tab where the mic and the video and all of those functions are. And so when you see that button, click on it and select the language that you wish to listen and speak in. That will be English or Spanish for this session. If you're joining on a phone or on a tablet, you will find the same options by clicking on the button with the 3 little dots that reads More in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Hola a todos, a todas y a todos. Mi nombre es Valentina y estoy aquí por parte de Community Language Co-op para ofrecerles y garantizar el compromiso que tienen con la justicia del lenguaje en esta sesión. La justicia del lenguaje es un tipo de interpretación simultánea, busca crear espacios en los que no dominen ningún idioma, espacios en los que todas puedan participar con el idioma de su corazón. Para lograr este objetivo, utilizamos la función de interpretación de Zoom. Lo que verán en un par de minutitos es que aparecerá un nuevo botón que aparece un globo terráqueo en la parte inferior de su pantalla, donde está el micrófono, el video y esos demás botones. Cuando lo vean, hagan clic en él y seleccionen inglés o español como su idioma preferido para esta sesión, para escuchar y para participar. Si está en un teléfono o en una tableta, encontrará las mismas opciones haciendo clic en el botón que tiene 3 puntitos y que dice More o Más en la esquina inferior derecha de su pantalla. A few things to remember is that I am interpreting simultaneously, and Spanish is 20 to 25% longer than English. So please, for those of you that decide to participate in English for this session, do keep that in mind, keep your speed and your clarity in mind. And for everyone, please remember to keep your mics off so that the background noise that we might all be experiencing doesn't interfere with the interpretation. We also suggest that any materials that haven't been translated in advance of the meeting be read out loud when you do use them or reference them so that I can interpret them in one language or another. Finally, when using acronyms, we usually suggest that you spell them out the first couple of times to avoid any confusion among myself or the listeners. If you have any questions or any trouble whatsoever with this technology, please let the whole group know by means of the chat box so we can all address it together. Un par de cositas que recordar es que estoy interpretando de manera simultánea, así que por favor recuerde tener claridad y un volumen adecuado cuando esté participando y por favor mantenga su micrófono silenciado si no está hablando para evitar que el ruido de fondo haga interferencia con la interpretación. Si tiene alguna pregunta o algún problema con la tecnología, por favor comuníquese al grupo completo a través del chat para que todas podamos apoyarla a resolverlo. Muchas gracias. Vamos a activar ahora los canales. Por favor, recuerden seleccionar su canal preferido. Okay, we're going to turn the channels on now. Please remember to select your channel. We're going to make sure that they're working correctly. And thanks again for having me.
And one note from...
¿Alguien en el canal de español que me escuche bien?
Sí, te escuchas.
Perfecto, gracias, Joel. Estamos listas para comenzar. Perfect, then we are ready to begin.
Rachel, invite them to pick a language.
Si llegan más personas después, ¿podremos invitarles a escoger su canal?
Thank you, Rachel, for letting us kind of interrupt there. But I think if everyone's chosen their channel, that was all we needed to get that started. So hopefully we're okay now. So thanks for letting me interject there.
Yeah. Oh, one other thing. As Valentina was coming in, she was coming in and out, and I see there's a lot of people on video. It would be a good thing to not be on video and be on mute and only put video on when you are talking so that we can serve that bandwidth for everyone. Otherwise, interpretation services will suffer a lot.
Porque me parece que estaban sufriendo los servicios de interpretación. No sé si me estén escuchando bien o no. Ok. Ok, bien. Gracias por eso. Y este es un recordatorio para mí, para hablar un poco más lento.
So I am happy.
Así que con gusto estaré...
Okay. So, as I said, this is a bit of a reset. I don't really like that word because we've been using it a lot with the pandemic. So the Great Reset, but we're sort of refocusing essentially. I'm Rachel Lehman. I currently am one of the 5 co-administrators that we have here with the CAG, and I'm the Healthy Communities Chair. And what we want to really start with in this sort of inaugural meeting of 2022 is getting everybody on track and like with some understanding about what a Superfund is. What does that even look like? I think that as we start to do this work, and many of our community members are not policy people, and they are not engineers or scientists, but they are experts in their own body, and they know when they don't feel good or their families don't feel good, and they know that something's not right in their bodies. And so we have a mix of experts and technical experts and community members and organizers. We have sort of a mix of that within our group. And we have found that sort of a runaway train as far as like the experts seem to kind of drive the train more often than our community members do. And so it's sort of a really interesting challenge to try to get everybody on board at the same time. And so that is what we want to do, though, because we have to listen to community and how this is actually affecting them, how these pollutants are affecting them, or these cleanups. And we want them to be able to meaningfully engage in an engagement process. Like that is key. I think that a lot of us have seen community engagement be a rubber stamp, and that's not what we want. We want there to be empowered. We want community members that are empowered with knowledge and science
y conciencia, y que puedan terminar haciendo algunas de sus propias decisiones, que puedan tener opiniones que sean recibidas por las personas que no quieren escuchar a la comunidad. Entonces sí, solo quería empezar con eso. Así que todo esto se trata de esto, de la comunidad. Probablemente vamos a hacer estas sesiones de los superfondos como talleres, presentaciones, y con gusto vamos a mover esto si tenemos que hacerlo, a viajar, si el COVID lo procura, pero queremos que todas estemos en la misma página, que vean estos documentos, que vean estos documentos, estas páginas y que digan, esto no se ve bien. Y hay que hagan las preguntas y las preguntas a las personas de las agencias, ¿qué está sucediendo? ¿Por qué es así? Entonces, bueno, esto es un poco como quería que empezáramos esta sesión. Y bueno, primero vamos a escuchar de Brian. No sé si... Bueno, primero vamos a...
And he's going to present on Superfund 101. Just take us through the process. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, Rachel. And actually, it'll be Jesse,
sorry,
the RPM
Jesse.
on the site. That's okay, but I will introduce myself if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
My name is Ryan Cloberdance. I am the EPA Community Involvement Coordinator for the site. And so it's my job to foster as much community engagement within the Superfund site as possible. So I'm really excited to be here, and thank you so much. And I will turn it over to Jesse.
Okay, let me turn my camera on so you guys get to see me. I am the project manager for the site on the side of the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. I manage the site pretty much for everyone. Also, for those who speak Spanish, para aquellos que hablan español, primer lenguaje español.
For those that speak in Spanish, you can ask me questions directly. I will also leave my contact information in the chat box for you to have my information and my email so that you can communicate directly with me.
Spanish, I speak Spanish, and that I'll leave my name and email in there so that they contact me directly with any questions they want, and I'll be able to talk to them in their language. So let me share my screen to start the presentation. Okay, actually, let me turn my camera off first. Oh yeah, can't quite get to there. Anyways, so what we're going to talk today, it's an overview of the Superfund program, and I'll just use Superfund as a shorthand for the longer name that it has, and that longer name is the comprehensive. Forgetting my names. The Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act. So I'll just use all of that. That's easier for us to recognize. CERCLA started because people started to understand that there was a problem of this abandoned dump site of chemicals. Specifically, there were two sites that started this process. One in New York, known as Love Canal, another one in Kentucky.
Que se llamaba Love Canal, y otro en Kentucky que se llamaba como el Valley.
There was a good number of these sites that have been documented, and there was no way to address them. So specific legislation was needed to address those sites. One of the things about Superfund is that give us an authority, a legal authority to respond to the release of what is defined as a hazardous substance or a pollutant or contaminant that could be an imminent or a substantial endangerment to us. It also excluded petroleum, and it gives us ability to use three types of responses: removal action, remedial action, and enforcement action. It also required us to use the National Contingency Plan to address what was going on. The National Contingency Plan, I'll explain a little bit later, so it will be in the next slide. One of the other things that it did is it created a fund. It put a pot of money that we could use to address the sites as the government, but it also gave responsibility to a group that we are calling the Potential Responsible Parties, or PRPs if you hear it in other places. And that group, the potentially responsible parties, are responsible for the cleanup costs and the damages to the natural resources. It also created a list, the Superfund list, pretty much, the NPL, the National Priorities List, that lists all of these sites that are part of the Superfund. It also requires, cooperation between the states and tribal governments, and it provides opportunity for community involvement. CERCLA is not delegated to the state, so the states do not manage CERCLA like it does other programs.
El Estado, como otros programas.
Them to clean up these sites, and there is also, for those sites that do not have a potential responsible party paying for the work there, it establishes the way that a site is paid from the federal monies and from the state monies. And there, what I have written there is that one of those first stages, known as the remedial investigation and the feasibility study stage, we pay 100% of the cost. When I say we, I mean the federal government. Then the federal government also pays 100% of the design of the remedy. The next stage after that is the remedial action. We pay 90% and the state pays 10%. When the stage changes to operation and maintenance, then it's fully funded by the state and the state pays 100%. This here is a very, very broad way of looking at the site. So is there a question?
I do have a quick question. I could hold it till the end. Just want to make sure that we're going slow enough and so that folks can understand that
Lento para que las personas puedan entender.
kind of 3 items that are covered are the EPA lists the hazardous toxins. That's one step. The second one is they identify who is accountable for the polluting. And the third step is then the EPA manages those cleanups. Are those the 3 main pieces of the CERCLA that you mentioned? That they're responsible, or that
Let me see if I say
the
that.
act? Like, what's the act? The act is what exactly? What does that actually do?
It creates a framework that let us identify those sites, identify those people that are responsible, identify the process that we go through. It identifies the criteria that we use to select a remedy, establishes a fund, a trust fund for the money to do those cleanups. It gives opportunity for community involvement, and it has enforcement tools too.
Okay.
And in later stages, it also provided for revitalization, reuse of sites that were, super funds.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Other question?
Harmony asked, is the polluting party is responsible to pay for the cleanup?
If we can identify one, yes, we go and ask for monies and work.
Thanks.
Okay. And I'm really not seeing the chat or anything else. So is there another question?
Yeah, Jesse, you're fine. As I see questions come up, I'll go ahead and ask them for you.
Okay. So this slide here just kind of breaks down all of our Superfund process in very broad categories. The first one, discovery and notification. We find about a site. Then we do an assessment and investigation of the site, and we determine where the contaminants are. Then we jump to a decision. We create a document that says, this is how we are going to do the cleanup. Afterwards, we actually do the cleanup, and then we perform the closeout. If you remember that I said that there was a list, so if a site is placed on the list, there comes a point in which it's also removed from the list. During all of this process, EPA is looking for the potential responsible party. And throughout all of this process, there is also community involvement. A potentially responsible party is involved in a couple of ways. So they agree to perform and pay for the response action under our supervision. We tell them to, just in case they don't agree, we compel them through some of the enforcement tools that we have. And their work is not done by themselves, it's subject to our oversight. And the state also participates in the oversight process.
Good question. So how do you identify the polluters and how long does the polluter have to remediate?
The polluter is identified through a search. One of the ways that Superfund work is that they define who's the owner, the operator, the transporter, people that were involved with the management of the site or the contaminants, and they are potentially responsible parties. We do the search of who's involved in that, and then we notify them that they are a potential responsible party and tell them to perform work. They have to clean for as long as the remedy is needed, pretty much. The record of decision establishes the remedy that would be put in place. So from there, it's the work.
So with the record of this, after that is done, the record of decision, can you give us a range on how long, maybe how long is the longest, like what's been the longest it's taken for the cleanup versus maybe
sites,
short?
So you have an idea, there are sites that will never be cleaned up and they will need management forever. Think of mining sites. The contaminants coming from a mine and acid mine waste, we don't have the technology today to leave the site in a condition that we call unlimited use. So for as long as there's contaminants coming, we'll have to manage it. There are some other sites in which they just come out sooner. I will only give you an example that just came up to my head. When I started working in 1998, my first day of work was a Superfund site, and that was in Puerto Rico. When I moved to EPA Region 8 Denver office in 2017, they were closing down that site. It took about 20 years for that work to be done.
Okay. Are there any, who does the enforcement? How do you do the enforcement?
We do the enforcement, and that's usually lawyers. We
Lawyers,
have
okay.
regulation tools. So we enforce those through letters and orders through our lawyers and courts.
Okay, if anyone, if anybody is responsible for the health issues or environmental damage, who is responsible for, let's say, somebody's body that, you know, and there's plenty of people here who can speak to this, but if now you are more prone to asthma, you have upper respiratory, birth defects, whatever, miscarriages, who's responsible for those health related issues and also the environmental damage that's been done?
Superfund compels PRPs to do the cleanup of the site and the environmental damages that they do. The other
say that again.
section,
I'm sorry. Can you say that again?
Yeah, Superfund compels the PRPs to clean up the site and, you know, the natural resources damage, clean up the site. The other portion, I think, this is not something that is covered by Superfund.
Okay. The health related pieces isn't covered by Superfund.
Yeah, cleaning up a site may fix some of those issues, but we're going for the site.
Okay, thanks, Jesse.
Wait, did I talk about this? Yes, PRPs, sorry about that. Then Superfund and the National Contingency Plan requires public involvement during response actions at certain setup locations. And they may, you know, that involvement includes grants, groups like this one, and outreach to communities and other stuff that we'll discuss later. Okay, key provisions of CERCLA. These are just the actions that we were talking earlier on. Superfund gives EPA the authority to do 3 types of action: a removal action, a remedial action, and an enforcement action. The removal action is something that it needs to be done on a very short time frame. The remedial action is something that takes a longer time. And then enforcement action, it's when we go out for what we do with the lawyers, and we send some tools to make sure that actions are performed by third parties. In this site, just to give you an example with this site specifically is broken down in 3 areas that we call operable units, 1, 2, and 3. The action that was taken in operable unit 1.
La acción que se tomó en la unidad operativa 1 era una acción de
parties and then put a plan into motion and do the cleanup. That started in 1998, and the cleanup ended 2014 with the last opportunities to clean up a property. And our final closeout of the OU1 ended in 2019. Removal action. During that investigation of the residential, there were a couple of properties that needed action on a shorter term. So on those properties, we use the removal action to take action on those locations. And the enforcement action is that some of these contaminants were traced back to ASARCO, and we received money from ASARCO to do some of those actions. And then ASARCO went bankrupt, and then the remaining portion of the work is done by the fund, by the government.
Jesse, I actually wonder, could you quickly explain who ASARCO is and what their work was?
ASARCO was the operator and owner of the smelters at the site. And they operated under different names for over 100 years, I think it was. And then they went bankrupt. So they no longer exist. Another question? And this is an example of how the removal actions or a description of some of the changes within the removal
o
action.
algunos de los cambios en las acciones de eliminación. Algunos requieren, algunas se
Another one
ejecutan en
requires
horas.
a little something much more faster, but not as fast as within 6 months. And in this case, the Superfund defines the person that takes on the work. In this case, the on-site coordinator. That's the OSC that you said here. And they are the ones that assess the urgency, and they're named like that in Superfund. The other type of action, which is the remedial action, something that takes a long term, it takes a long time to get to a permanent remedy. They usually involve multiple media and contaminants and take several actions to perform a cleanup. In our case, in OU2, which is the location around the Denver Coliseum, we are at the remedial action stage or area or definition pretty much, in which we're looking at investigating the area to identify contaminants and then establish what is the best remedial process to follow and implement that process. And that is at the bottom here. This is my position here. I am the remedial project manager. So I plan and manage the activities at the site. If there was a potentially responsible party, I would supervise the potentially responsible party to do the work. And in the OU2 case, which is in which we do not have a potentially responsible party, this is managed by the fund, then I manage EPA or the resources that EPA gives me to do that work. And sorry, we do have a PRP at OU2. At OU1, in which we at some point did not have a PRP, that was part of the fund.
So if you didn't have a PRP for OU1, how could you have declared it remediated and have delisted or enlisted or delisted or closed it out?
The presence of a PRP doesn't change the process. The listing came at the end after we have performed our cleanup actions. So we do not need a PRP to get to that stage.
Sure, then who's overseeing it and knowing that it's completed? Who's managing those funds? Who's contracting the environmental remediation specialists or engineers? Who if there's no PRP?
We do that work. When
Oh,
there's
you
no,
know, the project manager. Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Oh, it's you, the EPA. Okay, great.
Yeah. When there is no PRP, when I mentioned that there is a fund, it's a trust fund that was put in place by taxes from certain chemical companies, certain chemical product, not companies, chemical products, and the fund was created. So when there is no PRP, EPA uses the money from that fund to do the cleanup, do the investigation and cleanup of the site. That was the portion in which I mentioned that there was a division of who gets to pay what during the remedial investigation, feasibility study, remedial design. EPA pays 100% of those actions. Then on the remedial action, EPA pays 90% of that. The state pays 10%. And when we go to the operations and maintenance phase, the state pays 100% of that. That's only for those sites in which we do not have a PRP.
Maybe you said this earlier, so there was not a PRP for OU1. Is there a PRP for OU2 and OU3?
There is a PRP for OU2 and there is no a PRP for OU3.
Who is the PRP for OU2?
The city and county of Denver.
The city and county of Denver?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
And you said that site is at, you said that site is at the National Western Stock Show, the OU?
Yeah, there is. And after I'm done with this, I'm going to show you a map of the locations of the OU so that we can zoom in and zoom out so you guys get to see the edges and the areas of the site.
Thank you.
Another question?
Jesse, I think, oh, sorry, Rachel. I think Yadira had a question in the chat about how long it takes to start the cleanup process.
Charlie, this slide goes into that. So I'll use this slide to answer it. So the National Contingency Plan divides the process into 5 phases. The first one, the remedial.
La primera es la investigación de remedio y el estudio de factibilidad, que es donde estudiamos los contaminantes y observamos alternativas para hacer la limpieza y mitigar el peligro. Después de eso, seleccionamos el remedio y decimos, ok, de las alternativas que se presentaron en este estudio, esto es lo que podemos utilizar para limpiar el sitio. Después tenemos que decidir cómo vamos a tomar esta decisión, o sea, esto es lo que se va a hacer para limpiar el sitio, pero cómo construimos eso de hecho en el espacio, en el sitio, lo ponemos en acción. Ahí es cuando ocurre la limpieza. Una vez que están funcionando las acciones de remedio, hacemos la acción de remedio y después cerramos el sitio. ¿Cuánto tiempo se tarda? Depende de la información que necesitemos, la dificultad de limpiar los contaminantes y la dificultad de ejecutar la acción. Entonces, no hay una respuesta rápida que les puedo ofrecer aquí.
And where does come into play? Does that come into play in the selection of the
remedy? Yes, it does. The selection of the remedy, we have 9 different criteria to evaluate when we're selecting a remedy. Cost is one of those criteria.
And I'm thinking you're probably going to get to the part where the community actually is engaged in a little bit. Is that correct?
There is, there are times of formal community integration, in which the process tells us at this point, you're going to go to the community and ask for their opinion on stuff. One of those is right here. It's between the selection of the remedy and the remedial investigation and feasibility study. Once we have the feasibility study, there's a step that comes in between that is called the proposed plan, in which EPA says, okay, these are the different options that we have. We're going to pick this. These are reasons for picking them up. And at that point, we announce that, and we have a formal public comment period in which it goes out to community at large. The community looks at it. They give us our their comments, and then we look at those comments and answer those comments. We can change a remedy. We can change a portion of what was selected or done, and then we issue the record of decision. At this site, specifically at OU1, when the proposed plan came, the contaminants of concern at the residential portion of the site was lead and arsenic. And the initial numbers that EPA proposed were not accepted by the community. There were comments about how they didn't accept those numbers. So EPA lowered those numbers until the community accepted the new numbers. And that's how the record of decision was written. There is also another portion. Same thing for OU1. The operable unit 1, before I deleted that option, I took a formal comment period, which I take the community concerns at hand. I see what the concerns are, and then we decide if we need to make changes to the decision or we issue the decision as we said before. So those are formal processes, but there are informal processes. And this that we're having right here is part of the informal process in which there is communication between the community and EPA.
Entre la comunidad y la EPA.
Another question.
Jesse, is there a distinction in criteria or any other part of the process for an environmental justice community?
No, there is no of the 9 criteria. No.
Thank you for that distinction, Nola. I think that it is important to mention that, right? That this is an environmental justice community, and that there's disparate impacts here. And so, yeah, not like wondering if there's any sort of additional support or communication that is outlined in the process for these groups in particular.
Rachel,
Jesse,
maybe, go ahead, Ryan.
I can speak to that for just one moment. There, EPA has a separate program for environmental justice, and where that overlaps with Superfund is through an EJ screen process, which the agency uses to map and screen tool. It's a mapping and screening tool that provides EPA with a consistent data set and approach for combining environmental and demographic indicators for important environmental cleanup sites. So there is an environmental screen process that we use on some sites. I don't, it's a little bit newer, but I can send information out and we can talk later. I'm not going to, we won't take it in that direction right now, but we can talk later or at a different meeting about just the EJ screen process, how EPA uses it, and just other aspects of that. And then Joel, I'll let you go here.
That's a great, okay, that can be in later discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. And I'll just say for that same later discussion, I'm happy to share information about our state environmental justice mapping tools as well, Colorado EnviroScreen. From the state perspective, I'm with the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment, the state agency, and I'm the manager of our environmental justice program. We don't have a formal written down process for how Superfund cleanups are prioritized or sort of that we look at through environmental justice, but informally, when there are communities like the GES, Globeville, Elyria, Swansea neighborhoods that we know are environmental justice communities, my team is available to provide additional support and resources for the staff within our waste division, like Janine and Shannon and Fonda, who are working on the cleanup, and other resources for groups like this CAG, this community advisory group. So for example, our budget is funding the interpretation services tonight. So we're really open to providing whatever sort of additional services are needed when we know that there's a community that is bearing a disproportionate share of environmental health risks from multiple sources like Globeville and Elyria and Swansea. So thanks for that question.
Thanks, Joel. Real quickly, so it's kind of this, maybe you can weave this in. Jay has had a question back a little ways about water contaminant due to the seepage from the Denver Post. And also what toxins are actually identified in this process, which toxins do you actually identify? Lead, etc.
You mentioned something from the Denver Post, right?
Mm-hmm. The seepage into the water.
Yeah, there was groundwater issues back when OU1 was being cleaned up. There was surface level cadmium in the South Platte, and there was also efforts to go canvassing by the city EPA and city PHE, especially in Globeville, to ensure folks were not using well water because of potential seepage and cadmium levels. Can you maybe speak to what, outside of lead, what other types of toxins or toxic metals might be of concern or elevated past EPA levels?
If you don't mind, once I have the map, can I answer your question? So, because then I can talk a little bit more about the site and go into a little bit more in depth on your question.
Yes.
It's okay. Okay. And then the contaminants during the investigation, we screen for contaminants from the site. So we look at the history of the site and we kind of do a pre-screening, you know, where are the contaminants coming from the site? And then we go and evaluate what is in the media around the site. And we start pretty much to create a list based on the data that we have, that these are the contaminants that are present, that are from the site. They could be contaminant presence that are not from the site. And Superfund does not let us clean those up. A good example is, if I have a site that I'm doing a cleanup and there is a petroleum plume from an underground storage tank from gasoline, I cannot do cleanup of that contaminant because Circular or Superfund specifically tells me that I don't have the authority to perform or use funds for those actions. So after we do that remedy, we identify what our components are or contaminants are, and that's what we target for cleanup. Does that answer your question? Yeah, your second question?
Not completely, but I understand that piece of it. But just thinking about other contaminants, especially with groundwater, aquifer, and seepage, I understand it has to be tied back to a SARCO because that's where the contaminant in VVI 70 comes from. I'm just asking, the question is, outside of lead, what other contaminants have been identified and are traced back to a SARCO?
In OU1, the only two contaminants were lead and arsenic. In OU2 and OU3,
en las unidades operativas.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry, Jesse, can you repeat at what OU2 and OU3?
Yeah, OU3 and OU2, we have not made a determination of what the contaminants are.
Okay, because we're still working. Okay, got it.
Yeah, because we're still at the investigation stage.
Yep, you're right.
Okay, another question? This is just kind of a saying again what we just kind of just discussed more broadly. The remedial investigation and the feasibility study is what we use to support the selection of the remedy. When we're doing the remedy, when we're selecting a remedy, the information comes from these two documents. The remedial investigation is just an investigation of the site. We're looking for the contaminants and their spread. The feasibility study is looking for those technologies available that can do a cleanup of the site. And we don't look at just one, we look at a couple of them. And we do a comparison between them. There's a required thing that we have to do is what happens, if we don't address the site, if we just leave it as it is, and then use that kind of a base comparison with the other remedies. And here, when it says various lead agencies may conduct the investigation and the feasibility study, I have talked about EPA, I have talked about the state, but Superfund also includes federal facilities. And at other federal facilities, that federal agency is the lead site. So what we have around here, Arsenal, Rocky Flats, those are other federal agencies. So those federal agencies manage those sites. There is an agreement in which we do some oversight and some decisions, but all of this that you're seeing that I do, it's actually done by my sister federal agency.
Could you do me a favor and answer what does FS represent? I'm so sorry, I didn't know what
Not
that.
a problem, not a problem. The
RIFS.
FS, yeah, the FS is the feasibility study. It's a report that we prepare that compares the different cleanup options that we have. Does that answer your question, Krista?
It does.
And all of this happens because we do an assessment of risk. That assessment tells us, what is our cleanup number? And we do this using two targets, human health and ecological targets, pretty much. So we're doing to do human health and environment. So we're trying to do the things. And the risk assessment is the one that informs us of what numbers we can use for cleanup. When we select a remedy, Superfund tells us what needs to be in that decision. So first thing we're doing is making sure that we're protecting human health and the environment, that we are meeting the statutes and regulations of other laws that apply to the site. The treatment or the remedy has to be cost effective. We need to use a permanent solution to the maximum extent practicable or an alternative technology. And there's a preference for the treatment to remove the contaminant. We need to involve the state. The state needs to be a part of this. We just can't select stuff and do stuff without the state being with us and agreeing with us. And the remedy also has to be consistent with the national contingency plan. At OU2 and OU3, we are in this part of the processes. We are still pretty much on the remedial investigation feasibility stage. For OU2, we're still in the remedial investigation. For OU3, we finished the remedial investigation and now move into the feasibility process. The proposed plan, we write it, and then that goes to formal public comment. So I have to make a notice in the Federal Register that it will be open and that the public can take a look at it and give me all the comments that they want. I have to evaluate those comments and then either put a new proposed plan or move ahead with the record decision. Afterwards, once we reach the record decisions, once we have selected the remedy for the site, we go into the design phase, and a remedial design is put in place. That just pretty much tells me, it's like the plans for a house. How is it going to be built on site? And gives me the blueprints for that action. The remedial action is the actual work on the site, and it's when you see that we're addressing the contaminants at the site. Once that's built, and the remedy is what is called operational and functional. At that stage, we call that operation and maintenance. We go into site closeout. We document or clean up milestones in preparation for the site closure. Now, not all sites are cleaned up to unlimited use. Sometimes contaminants are left at the site that do not provide for unlimited use. When that happens, we have a requirement to every 5 years reevaluate the site to make sure that the remedy it's still protective until the site reaches that unlimited use capacity. Once we finish all of our process, then we do a closeout that removes or partially removes the site from the national priorities list. And again, in this site, for OU1, I did a partial removal of the MPL. I just removed that operable unit from the MPL. Jay, I see that you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I have a quick question. So, and maybe it's a little premature, and you may not have the answer, but if remediation means removing soil, like as in OU1, we removed the top foot of soil in arsenic and lead elevated properties, and if that happens, is there a plan as to where that soil will be moved to? Will it be encapsulated and kept buried on site? Will it be moved out of state, in state? What are the thoughts around that?
Yeah, all of the remedies, all remedies are different in one way or another. In our case, the waste from OU1, when ASARCO was working, was brought to the old ASARCO Globeville site and encapsulated there. And then during another phase of the project, it was taken to a landfill. So it really depends on the site. It's not everything needs to be capped, not everything needs to be removed from the site and disposed somewhere. It really depends on the site.
Specifically for OU2?
We don't have anything for OU2, so we don't know what we're going to do yet. We haven't reached a decision, so we don't know what we're going to do.
Okay, so it's a little bit premature to say which direction we're going, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank you. Harmony, you have a question?
I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. I believe you said that the only things that can be remediated are arsenic and lead, but it sounds like we could find other contaminants through this process. And so if we find other contaminants, then what? We just leave them knowing that they're a problem? Or can you have a second Superfund site on top of the existing Superfund site? Because that seems problematic. Or maybe I'm not understanding correctly.
Arsenic and lead were the contaminants for operable Unit 1. Those were the contaminants that we found that were related to the smelters. So those were the only ones that by law we could address.
Have you found other contaminants though?
At the site? And
Yeah.
in this case, when we go through the process, we go through, bigger screening, and then that's pared down. So we didn't find any other contaminants.
And then, I'm still trying to understand this process. It sounded like I OU2 and OU3, but we haven't. Do you move on to OU3 without completing OU2?
They are separate sites, and
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they're
Gotcha.
separate units, so I can
That makes
address
sense.
them. Yeah.
Hi, this is Adrian. Can I just ask a quick question? What is the time frame for OU2? You have it at the remedial stage right now, I believe is what you said.
At the remedial investigation stage.
Right. So
what
kind of time frame are you talking about? Like 5 years to the final stage? Is that how you project this? Is that kind of how it is projected out?
It really depends on what we find. If we don't find a lot, things are faster. If we find more and it's more spread, then things are slower. Really depends on what it is. And right now, Adrian, can I answer your questions when I go to the map?
Yeah, I just have one more. When just going back to a part of your presentation where you said, I think it's how you put it, if you find anything there, you can't investigate it because it's not part of the, if my understanding is correct, it's not part of the super fund. So
yes.
Is that how it is? So in this instance, let's just talk about OU1, OU2, and OU3 here. So in that instance here, if anything is present that above and beyond what is part of the super fund, you're not allowed to touch it or allowed to investigate it. I mean, that's apparently is what the law is, right?
Yeah. If there's a section, if the law tells us we have to clean up things that are related to the site, to the entity that created the contaminant. And another constriction is we cannot clean up petroleum products. So if we find something that is not from the site, and that's when I was giving the example of a petroleum plume from a USD, from underground storage tank. So if I have my Superfund site and next door, I wouldn't even say next door. If I have a Superfund site and on the same side there is an old storage tank, then I won't be able to address that cleanup in itself, because that is petroleum and that's specifically excluded from Superfund, so I can't address it. Imagine that I have my site, our site, and there's another site upstream from us, and their contaminants are moving. I won't be able to address those contaminants because they're not from my site. Because Superfund says I can only address the stuff from my site. And that's one of those constraints from the law in itself.
Jesse, if I could add something, even though those type of issues can't be addressed through Superfund, many other types of contamination are addressed through other environmental laws and policies. So for example, in Colorado, we have a state agency that's actually part of the Department of Labor. That agency is in charge of underground storage tanks from petroleum products. I'll actually put a link to their website in the chat. So what we're talking about tonight is just Superfund, but that doesn't mean that there aren't other processes that happen in other parts of EPA and other parts of the state health department where we are addressing those types of contaminants.
So I just want to make sure that I think Jay has a follow-up question, Harmony as well. And maybe Yadira's question is connected to theirs tangentially, but essentially I was thinking similar things as Yadira, like if you find something after the fact, like let's say it was discovered through I'm just being hypothetical, that we found a SARCO documents and they said, yes, we really used a ton of cadmium, tons of it. And now we know there's this new information that now that we know, okay, there's cadmium too. Did we actually do we need to go back in and would this now create an OU4 and to clean up that cadmium that's been discovered that the PRP SARCO is now connected with? That's sort of a hypothetical that might be useful.
Yeah. I would say it depends. when we do the evaluation, we look for a different number of contaminants. So even when, let's say documents, you found documents that say, we use this, then we say, okay, there's a chance that this might be a contaminant at the site. What did we do before? Did we investigate? Did we have this contaminant in our investigation? Did our investigation, could address its finding? And if those answers are yes, then even though there are documents saying it, there is information from our sampling that does not go in the direction of opening the site for another OU or for additional cleanup. But if the other way was, we found that there's a contaminant, I'll give you a different example for how you also add stuff. There are other contaminants, what we call emerging contaminants, showing up. Our life gives us new chemicals and new products, frequently. And sometimes those chemicals and products cause problems long term. So if we have a site that all of a sudden seems that they may have used some of these emerging contaminants, then there is a chance that we never investigated it before because it's an emerging contaminant, something that we didn't knew about before. And we have to think, okay, do we have information that can tell us something about this? And that can give you part of that process. So it depends on what is found and the work that was done during our process.
Thank you. I think Jay and then Harmony.
Yeah, I have a question because there is so much construction going on right now, right through, OU2, OU3, and we have so many both state and city and federal projects going on. What's being done right now to protect the workers that are there and their families? Because if I'm working in a place that is contaminated, what kind of education am I given to go home, take my clothes off before I go into my home, washing, my work clothes that may have contaminated soil on it and not washing it with my kids, like those types of preventative measures? Is that being done, and who is monitoring it and enforcing to ensure that both the prime and subcontractors are following that those safety precautions?
For workers, you're looking at OSHA. Wow, I'm blanking.
Hey Jesse, let me step in there a little bit. Like for example, the I-70 project.
Sorry, Fonda, can you introduce yourself?
I'm sorry, my name is Fonda Apostolopoulos. I'm the state project manager for the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. So on the case for I-70, we knew there was contaminated soils there. So before the regular workers went in there, they actually had remediation was done for all the contaminated soils in advance. All the people who were working on that had to have the 40-hour OSHA training, which is basically for working on contaminated sites. So everything had to be cleared before the general construction people could go on site. So if you were in those areas, the environmental work had to be performed ahead of time before the regular people. If you're a regular construction worker working on those sites, you can't through OSHA. So that had to be cleared first. So in the case of I-70, we worked very closely with CDOT's environmental consultants. We had a sampling plan. They did removal action. They removed all the soil that was contaminated ahead of time before they had the general workers come into place. That's kind of the way it works on a lot of these sites.
Okay, perfect. I appreciate that. And then lastly, I know it might be kind of foreshadowing, but is there, as you do the risk assessment and also look at remediation, is there a possibility, depending on what the environmental risks are to the community, to have blood lead testing, like mobile testing sites in the community to ensure that there is no elevated blood lead levels or arsenic or any other contaminants that might be discovered through this process?
That was something that was done when the cleanup at OU1 was happening 15 years ago. That was portion. So those activities that were done at one time and they're now completed, we're not repeating, we're not doing it again. OU1 is pretty much done.
Yeah, but I'm talking about OU2 and OU3. I'm not talking about, I know that there was a precedent set because the community pushed to have that in the record of decision to ensure that our residents we're protected and safe. I'm asking for OU2 and OU3. Is that potentially an option dependent upon the record of decision that comes out of that? Is that a possibility if there is a potential risk for people working in that area or living in that area?
That is still too ahead for me. So I can't tell you that's something that I consider during the record of decision, during the feasibility study and the setup of the site. Still need information to know if that would be part of the remedy.
And I wanted to add that we're, in between these meetings, we are going to be meeting as well to kind of like formulate these questions, Jay, like some of these more granular questions, formulate them so that we can ask them and have a lot longer of an opportunity to delve into it and get more explanation and just really understand what these processes are. So just please send me a message in the chat or send me an email or something, and we can and I'll give that information out as well. Just anybody who has topics and questions that they have that maybe require longer than a quick response, please feel free to reach out. Harmony and then Maria.
I have a comment. I spent 8 years working in oil and gas, and now as an environmentalist, I am often shocked and disappointed when government regulation fails to cover oil and gas, and to hear that petroleum products can't be covered in this. And then there's a lot of, well, this other agency picks this up or this other thing. And I find that a lot of times when that happens, it's just a lot of pointing to someone else, but there's not a lot of collaboration and a lot of things fall through the crack. And I really look to the EPA to look out for the health and safety of all of us and to start incorporating petroleum products into their regulations, especially in a community like this where Suncor, who processes a lot of petroleum products, would like, it just kind of blows my mind to hear these statements. That's all.
Maria.
Ok, yo voy a hablar en español.
Okay, I'll be speaking in Spanish. And my question is, you say, Jessie, that
la primera parte se limpió hace 15 años. Entonces, ya pasaron 15 años y no han considerado que tal vez con todo lo que hemos vivido de la construcción del 70, con todo lo que hemos vivido de tanto que escarbaron, sabemos que hay contaminantes, sabemos que ustedes nos han dicho que arsénico no hay ni plomo, pero realmente estamos seguros de que no hay. Realmente estamos seguros de que no se ha regado más este contaminante en nuestras comunidades.
These pollutants have not been further dispersed in our communities.
Considerar esta situación, porque si es así, a lo mejor la uno ya está contaminada. Siempre nos dicen que no, pero podemos confiar en ustedes, en lo que dicen en los estudios que hacen. Gracias.
Gracias, María. La contaminación que nosotros podemos limpiar era la de Azarco. Usted está mencionando contaminación que pudo haber venido por la construcción. Y eso no es un área que podemos atender. Azarco ya no existe, ya no está. Así que no tienen posibilidad de contaminar el área que nosotros limpiamos. Por eso es que nosotros decimos que el área que ya nosotros limpiamos, pues ya está limpia. Y nosotros pues no podemos atender pues la contaminación de la construcción de la I-70.
Pero si pensamos en hace muchos años, hubo otra Azarco en medio del 70, o sea, ha habido por diferentes tiempos, ha habido Azarcos entre estas áreas. Entonces, considerando también eso, ¿cómo podemos estar seguros de que no se ha regado por otras áreas? Aparte, en Swansea hubo algunos lugares que no se limpiaron y yo sé que no fue culpa de ustedes de que no se hayan limpiado. Yo sé que algunas personas no aceptaron que entraran a sus áreas, a sus residencias, pero a mí me queda la duda esa de si se contaminó más o si hay otra contaminación más en el área. Entonces, lo
El-
siento si,
no se
si
preocupe.
estoy siendo muy,
No
muy
se preocupe.
preguntona. Ok, gracias.
Las otras dos fundiciones de Asarco estaban en el lugar que ocupa hoy la unidad operacional 2 y la unidad operacional 3. La otra fundación que está allí está en otro de los sitios que yo no manejo, pero que maneja Fonda, que es el Asarco Global, que también queda cerca. Ahorita cuando estén en el mapa los presento. Nosotros, la seguridad que podemos darle es que nosotros para la unidad operacional 1 investigamos 4.455 residencias para determinar si tenían contaminación. Y de esas, 855 necesitaban limpieza. Y al fin y al cabo, quedaron unas 55 que no nos permitieron acceso para limpiarlas o para investigarlas. Así que esa es la seguridad que yo le puedo dar. O sea, nosotros investigamos el 99% de las propiedades residenciales ahí. Y por eso es que le damos la seguridad de lo que decimos. Por eso que yo estoy seguro de que el proceso que nosotros seguimos llevó a que se limpiara el área, pues como tenía que limpiarse.
Ok, gracias por responderme en español.
Seguro. Y doña María, no he puesto mi información en la barrita de al lado. Voy a poner mi teléfono y mi correo electrónico. Si usted tiene preguntas y nos tenemos que sentar y tenemos que estar 2 horas hablando, estamos 2 horas hablando.
Ok,
Eso no es problema.
muchas gracias.
Okay.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Jesse, for doing that.
Gracias, María, y gracias, Jessie, por hacer eso. Yadira Sánchez también es un miembro de la comunidad y es una de nuestras coadministradoras y su mano está levantada, pero quería mencionar eso antes de que haga su pregunta. Adelante, Yadira. Ok, si está bien, voy a hacer esta pregunta.
A lot more easier.
Please.
Jessie, yo sé que
Jessie, I know that
OU1 ya está clausurado y que ustedes solamente probaron ciertos contaminantes, era lo que estaba creyente que estaba en la tierra en ese entonces. Entonces estoy tratando de entender que si a través del tiempo, porque eso fue hace 15 años que hicieron la muestra, ¿no? Que sacaron las muestras para la tierra. Entonces, ¿cómo se puede volver a abrir un nuevo que no está relacionado con el Asarco? Que sí hay, como estaba diciendo Rachel, que sí hay nuevos contaminantes en esta área. Tiene uno que primero comprobar al EPA que tiene uno estos contaminantes en grandes partes del 8216 para que se abra una nueva búsqueda.
To start a new search of the new pollutants or contaminants. And when you said that you were...
solamente estaban probando la tierra para las dos contaminantes. ¿Ustedes estaban probando la tierra para más contaminantes o solamente esos?
Déjame contestarte la segunda parte primero. Nosotros hicimos una evaluación inicial para determinar cuáles son los contaminantes que afectaban el sitio y luego que identificamos cuáles son los contaminantes que estaban en el sitio, pues cuando hicimos la investigación específica de cada casa, pues estábamos buscando esos contaminantes, porque esos eran los que estaban relacionados con el sitio superfondo. Exactamente. Para cualquier sitio, información, déjame buscar.
Sí me he tratado de meter al sitio del EPA, pero solamente te da folders y tienes que bajarlos a tu computadora para tratar de revisar la información. Entonces es un poco más complicado porque sí me gustaría que pudiera uno hacerle el clic al enlace en el sitio de EPA para que le dé a uno, no que necesariamente le esté pidiendo permiso a uno que si puede bajar todos estos documentos. Nada más queremos revisarlos porque muchas de las personas que tenemos computadoras pues no tenemos tanto espacio como tipo para bajar tanto documento, ¿no?
Ok. Con respecto a la primera pregunta que me hizo, descubrimiento y notificación de un lugar. Si hay información, la información se comparte y la EPA hace una evaluación para saber si lo que se encuentra llega al nivel del superfondo. Y entonces la EPA toma una acción. Creo que Joel mencionó que superfondo no es la única herramienta que se tiene para trabajar contaminantes. Hay diferentes herramientas. Yo no he hablado de ellas porque la realidad es que estamos hablando solamente de superfondo, pero existen otras herramientas legales, ¿verdad? Otros programas que tiene el federal, que tiene el Estado, para atender contaminantes de otra clase. Superfondo establece una barra, establece un nivel el cual hay que pasar para que se pueda atender por superfondo. Así que piensa en superfondo como en una herramienta dentro de muchas que se pueden utilizar para atender contaminación en algún lugar, que no necesariamente la única solución.
Y puedo contestar un poco, pero en inglés, porque puedo entender en español, pero el lenguaje de mi corazón es inglés. Así, un momento.
It is in English. So
Yo diría, I would add that because there are those other programs or options outside of Superfund that we use to address other forms of contamination, that might be a way that we can kind of answer some of your questions. So for example, we're working right now as the state health department, as CDPHE, to set up what we're calling a lead soil shop. So it will be an opportunity for residents of North Denver to bring in their soil to test it to bring in soil from their yards to test for lead. And that's something we're setting up. We're hoping kind of for the May timeframe, it will be something outside of the Superfund process, but it's part of our overall efforts to ensure that we're protecting public health. So I think some of those questions, if you have ideas or suggestions or questions that might not fit easily within the Superfund area, you can always come to me and send me an email, and I can do what I can to try to connect you with other resources or opportunities through CDPHE. That's what we're here for as the Environmental Justice Program.
I just have a quick comment. Is there information given out? Because I know there's still concern about OU1 from some residents, because not every single property was remediated, because it had to have homeowner, homeowners had to give access for that. And I know that the city did not want to, quote unquote, red line or flag those properties, but there is a listing that DDPHE has of those properties that were not remediated. And so it might be helpful to also, or is there an opportunity to get that information out to residents that might be new residents that actually have a property that was not remediated?
There is a process, part of what we call the institutional control, because the site had those properties that did not give us access. That is not a site that gets unlimited use. Those facilities, those properties, they needed work. So what we did is we created an informational process. We went to the Denver clerk and recorded a notice of environmental concern, or notice of potential environmental concern. And the difference is that those that had an area of potential, they did not give us access to sample the property. So we don't know if the concentrations at that property, are something that need a cleanup. And those that had a notice of environmental concern, they gave us access to sample, but did not give us answers to do the cleanup. So that is recorded there, so that through the, people can find it there. The other portion is that every year, CDPHE sends a notice to the property address, so to the physical location, and it also sends a notice to the owner's address. And the notice is sent out in Spanish and in English, and it informs, the person that this exists and gives them information to prevent exposure to lead and arsenic. So
great,
if
thank
a
you.
renter,
those are really good processes.
Yeah. So if that way, the idea behind that is first that the renter, if there's a renter, that the renter gets the notice, and then have some talk with their landlord but also people understand that there's still exposure there. And that will continue for as long as those properties are out there. Now, when someone finds out that there is, someone inherited a property, someone bought a property and they found about this, they usually will come and talk to either me or Fonda. And if they come and talk to me, I'll send them to Fonda, because the site is in this operation and maintenance stage. This is now at 100% managed by the state. So they go to Fonda and they ask Fonda what they need to do to remove the notice. And then depending on where they are, what they have to do, either the investigation or the cleanup. EPA tried several times to get access to those properties. And then finally in 2014 were the last houses that gave access. And at that point, the funds that came from the super fund are no longer available for cleanup. So those people that are left with those notices have to do the work on their own. They just need, for us to remove the notice, they need to come talk to us, follow our process so that we can remove the notice.
So that seems like an opportunity for folks to kind of, again, like send more questions my way, so then we can formulate the topics for future CAG meetings and have longer opportunities to talk about these issues. And we have about 30 minutes left. So I just wanted to kind of get a time check on that.
The presentation, I just took it out because that was the last portion of the presentation. And now I'm just gonna show an aerial of the site and talk about 2 or 3 of the questions that were asked during the presentation, and that people kind of know where the site is and the boundaries. Is that okay, or should we leave that for some other time?
No, please do that.
Okay. So this is what the site is today. This portion here is operable unit 2, and I'm showing the purple property on the right side of the screen. Then on the left side of the screen is operable unit 3. A better idea of where to find them. Operable unit 2 is pretty much the parking lot of the Denver Coliseum. And operable unit 3, it's the northwest corner of the I-70 and I-25 junction, which is this location here. Okay. Sorry, the other way. So I'm zooming in on OU2. This is the area that we are investigating today. Where are we today? We had a remedial investigation done sometime past. We needed more information to continue with that remedial investigation because it didn't address all of the site media. Then in 2016, the city and county of Denver built a stormwater channel throughout this location, throughout this area, coming in and discharging here and then to the global plant. During that work, environmental information was collected, and city and county in Denver is the potential responsible party. They are the ones that have to do the cleanup. This is also the location of the former Omaha and Grant smelter. This is where the facility was. And so during that collection of information, I asked Denver to put everything that we know about the site in one document that we call the scope, and then propose a plan to collect information to understand what the site is. And that was completed, what year is this? 2022, so last year. The next step after that, we have a process in which we check the quality and the criteria for us to collect our environmental samples to make sure that we can make decisions on the information that we collect. And that's the stage that it is right now. Denver sent it to me, I sent it back with comments and they sent it back. So So we're just going through that process. There was a question about timeline. Although I can't tell you too far into the future, I expect that sometime between now and summer, I'll be able to finish that quality assurance project plan review. That's the technical term, just in case you hear from me again. And then implement the actions. That means go out and collect the samples that we said we're going to collect. Then OU3, and I'm moving the map to the OU3 location just in case you didn't see what I'm doing. OU3, we finished the remedial investigation in 2018. OU3 does not have a potential responsible party. So that is funded by the government. And I'm just waiting for the funds to move to the next stage, the feasibility study, in which I will look at possible remedies that we can use at this site. There is some soil contaminations, usually at depth, usually about 10 feet, but there is also a groundwater cadmium plume that moves from the site, it crosses over the I-25, and then it starts moving towards the former Asarco Globeville site, kind of in parallel with the river, with the South Platte River.
That's what I was
Jesse,
talking about earlier about the cadmium coming from the old Denver Post site, which is actually, I believe, OU3.
Yeah, this here. So that is the cadmium plume.
Can you really quickly describe what a cadmium plume is?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. The cadmium plume is a groundwater. It's groundwater that's contaminated with cadmium. So
okay, and it move. How does it move?
I'll answer this and you tell me if this is what you're looking for.
Okay.
Water moves through the soil because soil is not solid. Soil is just a bunch of particles. So water just moves between the particles. Just think of sand. When you put water on one corner of sand, it comes to the other side. It just moves in between the little grains and continues ahead in that direction.
So this is underground. This is underground that this is happening.
This is underground.
Thank you.
A well, wow, forgot. I'm calling a well investigation. I'm forgetting the inventory. Was done some time ago to figure out if there were any water wells. Turns out that the area is served by Denver water, so there's no one drinking this water. There's no exposure to the water. So it's moving up to this side. And that's what the feasibility study is going to look at. It's the media, the soil, and the groundwater. How can we clean it up? Once we figured that out, I'll write a proposed plan, and that's what will go out for public comment.
There were a few properties when the investigation was done that were still using well water in the area, especially in the Globeville area. So I know there were only a handful, but there were some that were still using it, and some were just using it for irrigation to irrigate their property. Even though Denver Water was servicing those homes, there were still wells that were being used and accessed.
Okay.
Let me jump in there real quick on that. The survey was done on all the properties to make sure everybody was attached to Denver Water. There may be some wells, but part of the problem also is that a lot of people didn't want to admit they had wells because they're worried about losing water rights because, like you said, it was used for irrigation. The plume, though, that's leaving from the OU3 is a very shallow groundwater plume. It only goes about 20, 25 feet. Most of these wells are going to go over 100 feet deep. You're not going to take the water that's at 100 foot deep because there's not enough recharge to be able to use that groundwater. So there may be some wells in there, but they're much deeper and they're not going to be the ones impacted by the metals. However, at the time, if they did have a well, we were, at the time of the cycle, they were going to sample that well, but no one volunteered, so nothing we could do about that.
And is there cadmium, surface level cadmium in the South Platte, in the Platte River?
There are portions of the Platte River that, like 100-foot portion that is being impacted, but it's mostly coming from the Asarco Globe plant that was been remediated. However, there's a residual amount left over of metals that are still flushing through the system. However, that only happens during a low flow period of time, and it's only for a very short distance. No one is actually drinking that water at that time period. So because of all the dilution and everything else, it was considered still safe.
Okay, I think Joel had a question, wanted to revisit Nola's question from earlier in the chat, and then Janine.
Well, I was gonna bring up Nola's question, so go ahead, Joel.
Go ahead.
Oh, I don't need to say anything. I just realized we hadn't answered Nola's question. So Nola, do you want to ask the question out loud maybe and make sure we all understand what it is?
Yeah, I was just wondering, because we know that there was the smelter contamination at OU2, and then there was also a landfill there later. Well, I was kind of curious if that's why the city of Denver is responsible, is because of the landfill. But also, are both of those sources of contamination included in the Superfund?
Yeah.
And are we going to talk about the initial findings in the remedial investigation?
Okay, let me start with City and County of Denver being a potentially responsible party. The way that Superfund works and determining a Superfund, who is a potential responsible party, is very broad. So it's not just the person that actually puts the contaminant, but even future owners, if they don't do what we call due diligence, an environmental paper review of the site to make sure that they understand what the site is, that they make it the site worse if there's contaminants and all that stuff. So when Denver bought the property back in the 50s or 40s, they became a part owner. So Sarko was no longer there. Denver was the next one. So that's how they were selected as a potentially responsible party. The investigation that is going to happen does have a soil vapor component. We're looking, methane is a vapor, it's a gas. So we're looking at some of these gases just to understand the site more than anything else. This is where we get into sections in which Superfund doesn't have the ability to address some portions in others. So this is one of those intersections.
And I appreciated what Joel said earlier about there's other entities that help in those areas, right? And so as we kind of dig into this, the areas that aren't, obviously that it would be outside of the purview of this CAG, but it gives us an opportunity to go and kind of hunt those down and really get an entire, like a cleanup in its entirety instead of piecemeal. And so, yeah, so as we're kind of working through these processes, it's good to know there's other places that handle other types of pollutants. And I believe Yadira asked the question earlier about, is lead the only thing that you checked here? Is that correct, Yadira? Or
yeah, Janine already answered that. They're just going, so basically I got it now, they're just checking for whatever was related to the Asarco. So anything that's just related to that and whatever, they're not going to check for anything extra. It's just those particular things that are finding. And I think that he had said it earlier in the meeting. If there are other contaminants that are there, they're not able to clean them up anyhow because it's not related to the Asarco.
Thanks, Yadira.
I just want to add a question to that though too. But if they find other things, is there an obligation to inform the community of it, even if they can't clean it up?
I guess the short answer, there is no obligation, but through groups like this one, the community will be informed and they can know about it.
And I think, that's really the advantage of groups like this community advisory group, is it's a place where EPA and CDPHE can come and, one, learn what questions there are, right? And two, start to provide answers for the impacted community. So like Jesse has said, part of the investigation in OU2 will look at soil vapors. It will be measuring gases that are in the soil, like methane, as part of the site characterization, which in environmental science terms, that's a way of saying understanding what's in the site. And that type of information that comes out through investigations is something that can be made available. I think, I don't want to get too far ahead, but I think it's that's the type of information that can be made available to the community through groups like this. So this is the right place to be if you have those questions and you want to kind of find out the information of what the agencies are learning through the site investigation.
I think that was Harmony. Does that answer your question, Harmony?
Yes, my next question is if you found anything you guys want to share with us that we don't know already.
This is your time.
Oh, yeah, teed it up.
What we find, because it's in the reports and we discuss it. So, what we find, and I think like just Joel said, if you want to find out, just they come into the meetings. What I have on screen now, it's answering Christine's request to put the path of the cadmium. This is a drawing from the remedial investigation at OU3. And what you can see, it just lays out where the contaminated water is. So this is kind of the area of the plume. I'm just looking at the comments now and see if I have an answer or something. So if you have any questions, just jump.
Jesse, I'll pose a question, and then you don't have to answer this. This could be a question for maybe one of the community members present or anyone who really knows the answer. I know Christine has made some maps of this, but could you explain the difference and overlap between OU2, the operable unit 2, and the triangle? So the triangle is an area that often gets talked about in terms of sort of the future land use and development of this area. And it partially overlaps OU2, but not entirely. And I think that's something a lot of people want to understand.
Sure. Let me show you. I'm showing you now what the site used to look like when OU1 was active. That's a little bit too much. So all of the purple is our site. And when I say our site, I mean the Vasquez Boulevard and Interstate 70. All of the different operable units that make it. So all the purple is our site. Okay. This portion on the southwest corner of the junction of the I-25 and I-70 is part of OU1. And this larger portion on the east side of the South Platte River is also OU1. OU3 is just this corner. As you can see, it's not within, it's not inside OU1. And OU2 is inside this corner here that I'm drawing. This is OU2. The difference between the different operable units is that when we address operable unit 1, it was just for the residential properties in the area. So that's what we were looking at when we were doing the investigation and the cleanup. Then,
and Jesse, if it's okay, I think maybe I was asking a little bit of a different question. I was sort of talking more about something outside of Superfund that a lot of people are familiar with in the area, which is the triangle area. So I think Christine made this suggestion in the the chat, and I'm happy to share the map that Christine made. If that's okay, I might take over the screen share really fast and just kind of make sure that that's there so that everyone can see. So can everyone see that? Thumbs up?
Yeah,
We're good.
Okay,
Thanks.
so this is a map of the area that's often called the triangle as part of the National Western Redevelopment. So you can see that part of that area, this kind of part with the Coliseum, is part of OU2, of Operable Unit 2, but not all of it. And Christine, I don't know if there was more you wanted to say there, or Nola, or if anyone else kind of has questions about how those areas are the same but different. But this is a good time for us to all kind of understand the boundaries and the area. So wasn't sure if anyone else wanted to add anything or to that.
Christine, do you have something more?
Hi, thank you. I don't really need to talk. I just think it's important that people see that Operable Unit 2, part of it, only the part owned by Denver, which Joel is pointing to, which is the Coliseum and the blue area, only that is included in Denver's plans for the triangle, because they don't own the Pepsi land, they don't own the Forney Museum, Denver. So it's not going into the planning for the triangle. So are there other questions on that? I think it's important that people know some of OU2 is in, quote, the triangle. Thank you.
I'll stop the share, but thank you for creating the map, Christine. I think that's like an important point for us to just contextualize where things are in the community. So thank you for creating those for us.
So, go ahead, Nola.
Oh, sorry, just a quick question. Is there an obligation for the PRP to be involved in the CAG?
There is a need. I direct the PRP to come and talk. When the QAPP comes, I've already told the group that I will share what I call the final draft. After I have done all of my reviews with Denver.
QAPP, really? The QAPP? Thank you.
And I couldn't make it without saying it once, huh? So when I'm done doing my review with Fonda and of the quality assurance project plan, that's what I call the final draft. That still it's something that I've told this group that I would share with them to discuss, see what they have to say about it. And afterwards, after they tell me what they see about it, what they think about it, then I will finalize it. If there's anything that they tell me that I need to change, then I'll go back to Denver and say change. If not, I would just tell Denver, finalize it to give me the final one. And that is a wow, I forgot what I was going with here. See, that's the QAPP thing.
Nola, did that answer your question in terms of the PRP's, I'm doing it too, the potentially responsible parties' involvement in the community advisory group?
Sorry, I didn't answer because I missed the point. I didn't complete the point. So when we are going to that discussion, I will ask Denver to come and either them or their contractor, the one that created the document, to come and be part of that discussion. So it really depends on what's happening at the site. The level of community involvement really depends on what's really happening at the site. And you may not have gathered this, but this is a long process. Remedial investigations are long. It takes a long time. And there is a lot of time that I just spent waiting. There's really not a lot really going on. Someone is writing a report, the reports get the review internally, then it gets sent to someone else. And so there is a lot of time in which something happened. Even the work that is going to happen for the investigation, I think it will take a couple of weeks to finish. And then we'll have to sit down and collect groundwater data for at least a year before we can have enough information to, to do a proper evaluation, if not longer. So there are times in which there really isn't anything happening at the site.
No hay nada que esté sucediendo en el sitio que será de interés de las personas que no son yo, que están trabajando directamente y específicamente en el sitio.
Christine, you want to follow up?
First of all, I want to thank Jesse because this is the best presentation I've ever seen from EPA. So thank you very, very much. Very clear, well done. But I'm just thinking we need to sort of, I have several questions I don't want to inject now because we're at a good place, but that came up during this time. So maybe we can set them for the March agenda, Rachel, or meet with anyone interested to gather process questions. And maybe Jesse, we can actually get the timetable because I think you've said a couple different things in the timetable I'd like to clarify. But to Nola, to your point, most of this takes place between the EPA and Denver. And the only time that we really are required to be involved is when there is a proposed plan at near the end of this. But it sounds like the agencies want to get our feedback all along, and I'm hoping Denver is interested as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. So yes, in between our meetings with the community advisory group as a whole, we will have steering committee meetings and to kind of filter through those questions and see what is going to be sort of the next topic for the next meeting. Hopefully that helps us to fully answer people's questions. We're also creating a frequently asked questions kind of directory, so then people can actually like get some information. And we're also we're going to be very intentional about making it understandable. It's going to be super duper clear and you don't need a degree to understand it. So that's the whole intention here. And I think we have a couple hands, Yerida and then Christine.
I just wanted to ask a quick question for Jesse. So he's saying that it's going to take about a year or so in order to come up with an evaluation of what kind of remediation is going to happen in OU.
No.
Oh.
The initial sample, groundwater sample, we're thinking it's going to take at least a year. It could be longer.
Oh, it could be longer.
The site is also kind of broken down in phases, and this is just going to be the initial phase. So there is more time that is needed. So for the timeline, I think the clearest thing I can tell you is that I expect that we'll start that sample collection in OU2 sometime between now and summer.
Okay, Jesse, entonces tengo otra pregunta.
Okay, Jesse, so then I have another question. In the meantime,
nadie puede construir nada arriba de eso, ¿verdad?
No, la gente puede tomar acciones. ¿Sabes? Si te fijas en OU2
sí.
Y en OU3, esas son áreas comerciales, esas son áreas industrializadas, sí. Y se toman acciones. Así que ellos pueden continuar con el trabajo mientras yo no tenga un récord de decisión que me diga cuál es el remedio que vamos a activar. Yo no tengo forma de limitar o actuar sobre eso, ¿verdad? Hasta cierto punto.
Entonces ellos pueden construir arriba de esta área contaminada si todavía no sabemos cuál es la limpieza que se tiene que hacer o solamente pueden hacer como tipo planes para la área.
Se puede trabajar. Aquí es que viene la parte en el que entra uno de los aspectos de Superfondo. Y es, si tú eres un ente que quieres comprar una propiedad aquí y entrar, tú haces una evaluación ambiental. Y esa evaluación ambiental te va a, si está bien hecha, ¿verdad? Te va a identificar que aquí hay un problema ambiental. Así que tú como comprador tienes que cumplir con lo que nosotros llamamos la ley de brownfields. que permite
follow the law of ground fields that allows this kind of work. And so we start a process of a good faith buyer
prospective purchaser, and that's
or a
just
bona fide prospective.
translate well in English.
That's for the translation, a bona fide prospective buyer. In that process,
Hace la evaluación y usualmente
we
se
do the evaluation or the study, and they usually come to us and they say, we want to buy this area, but I know that there's a problem here. But these are my intentions. And so the EPA works with the buyer to take some actions so that the buyer is also protected, so that they're not a potentially responsible party. And so we work with them so that they can work with the place in the site. And so we reach agreements and protections. And so we celebrate these agreements between the EPA, the buyer, and the Department of Justice. And when the EPA does these particular type of agreements, and these agreements are like the more complex in this process of a bona fide potential buyer. And so then we emit a notification so that the public knows, and we receive their comments also, because we can take actions. It's not like
te dé la gana, porque si tú compras y haces lo que te da la gana, te ganaste el sello de potentially responsible party con todo lo que eso lleva. Básicamente la forma en que trabaja Superfondo, cargas con toda la responsabilidad del sitio, básicamente lo que es. Así que no es algo pequeñito. La gente que se envuelve en esto sabe que hay un riesgo y por eso es que se busca ofrecer eso.
¿No cree usted que si las personas privadas que están comprando o tienen ese compromiso con esta tierra y tienen ese compromiso, como se dice, de buena fe, la área está contaminada, ellos hacen, obviamente que están haciendo entonces algo para arreglar la contaminación, pero no están solucionando todo por completo porque ustedes todavía no han completado lo que esa tierra tenga en sí. Entonces, como son private, ellos lo compraron, quieren construir, hacen las reglas mínimas que están requeridas por el EPA, como dice usted, y construyen hogares y viviendas, pero ¿no afecta eso? ¿O ellos ellos pueden seguir adelante con eso?
Ellos pueden seguir adelante. Una de las condiciones de ese tipo...
¿Cuál es el propósito de tener a la EPA haciendo tanta investigación por tanto tiempo? Si cualquier persona que compra privado, básicamente entonces mientras hagan lo mínimo requerido por el EPA, pueden hacer en sí lo que ellos en realidad quieren. ¿Cuál es la protección a la humanidad?
Uno de los requisitos que ellos tienen que cumplir con nosotros es que ellos tienen que seguir el remedio que nosotros escojamos.
¿Pongan al final?
Sí. Y las restricciones que nosotros pongamos. De lo contrario, pierden la protección. Y yo creo que una forma bien sencilla de poner qué significa perder la protección.
It is, what does it mean for them to be protected? Someone that comes and doesn't follow the rules, and we have a project.
$, trabajarlo. Nosotros le podemos mandar una
factura. We can send them a bill that's $200 million. So that's a very simple way of explaining the responsibility that these people have to make sure that they follow the rules, right? Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, one of the things that the Superfund seeks is reusing these sites so that they just get abandoned. And that's why at some point we built a change for the brownfields, for these type of processes. Okay, so it's not as simple as we can just come and do whatever we want. There's a big process. And so the results are considerable. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. I just put up a poll that just asked some questions. Rachel, do you want to kind of explain the poll and what we're asking?
So at this point, we've had this presentation about Superfund and what it's about. We first of all just want to know if this is your first time ever being with us, so then we can kind of know if this is, you know, people that we've been working with before, or if you're new to this community. And then, the other question is kind of just seeing what you got. Do you feel like you need more Superfund, maybe a Superfund 102 to kind of supplement the 101? Because we're really trying, we really do want to, like, or we will probably have to do this over and over again as we bring new members in and kind of get them up to speed. So we want to make sure it's as understandable as possible. Angela, where's the poll? I think, can you just click poll at the bottom? Is that how? That's it, right? You just click your poll. Christine says, I can see the poll, but I can't pick an answer.
I don't actually know how to help because I can't see what it looks like for everyone else. So maybe someone who already filled out the poll can tell Christine what they did.
Yo ya la llené. La primera vez que salieron dos veces.
I already filled it. It came out twice, but I filled it up the first time already.
María, ¿puede responder otra vez? Porque la primera vez Yadira lo cierra, así necesita hacer responda una segunda vez.
Ok, ¿me la pueden poner otra vez?
Sí, solo usted, porque solo una persona responde cuando la primera vez. Así, solo usted, María, necesita responder una segunda vez.
Ok.
Thank you. Okay. I appreciate everyone's time. We're right at time. There will be an email coming out about the steering committee meeting, and/or if you can't make that meeting, if there are some questions that you want to continue to drill down on, we're happy to put those in there. We're super available. We want to be super available and super open to just letting you all steer the direction of this. So whatever information you need, whatever resources you need, we're hopeful that we can be that. Thanks, Drew. Appreciate you. All right. That's it for today.
Well, does anyone need my information? I put it there. I don't know if everyone got it. The one that needed it got it.
Thanks, Jesse. I think you put it in the chat earlier.
Yeah.
Okay. And well, in that email, I can also include like all the principles here to kind of get people, so they have that as well.
Okay.
But yeah, thank you, Jesse. Okay. All right. That's a wrap. Everybody stay warm and have a great rest of your night. Gracias.